Well, can the country's biggest metro afford to be led by another coalition after the local government elections in just 2 weeks' time? How likely is it that that, in fact, will happen? The elections expert, Wayne Sussman, joins us now. Wayne, good evening. Thanks for your time on the Pulse tonight. Let's just go back a little bit. 2016, it's easy to forget how important this was. Herman Mashaba being elected mayor, the first time that the city of Joburg did not have a mayor from the ANC. It was really a massive moment.
Correct. So let's just go back and remember the hours after the election where it first of all became clear that the ANC wasn't going to come close to near 50%. Yes, they finished as the largest party, but it was Herman Mashaba and the Democratic Alliance which finished right behind them. And then this remarkable coalition or arrangement gets made between the DA and the EFF and a range of other parties, including the IFP. And you have these remarkable scenes in the council chambers where Herman Mashaba gets hoisted upon EFF shoulders, and he becomes the first non-ANC mayor of this metro.
Up until then, I mean, you'd had a sort of succession of mayors in Joburg. You'd had Parks Tau before that. You'd had Amos Mosondo. There was a sort of continuation. You know, one was passing on the mantle or the candle to the other. These were people who knew each other. Parks Tau had been groomed for a very long time to be mayor. We forget how solid the ANC had been in Joburg for so long.
Incredibly so. I think in 2006 they got over 62% of the vote. So this was a very safe metro. And over time, in 2011 it started, and then there was a dramatic fall in their support in 2016. And as you say, it was business unusual in the city of Johannesburg, with this outsider becoming our mayor.
What led to that situation? I mean, in 2016, it was about Jacob Zuma, perhaps as president of the ANC. It was about dissatisfaction, I think, with the movement generally. But there were local dynamics as well. I mean, you know, I remember having conversations with people in the city of Joburg and saying, you've had a billing crisis for a decade. You know, there were big local issues that also really mattered.
Correct. So the billing crisis, power outages, robots not being fixed, and aging infrastructure, all these things compounded, and of course the macro issue of the major with Jacob Zuma, the president of South Africa, being unpopular in metro areas, particularly in the city of Johannesburg.
So it's difficult to make predictions, right? But the ANC managed to get back into power through a sort of coalition. Do you think they'll be able to take the city outright in this election?
Well, if one looks at the 2019 results, which I always use as a barometer, the provincial results, they did much better. So they got slightly over 50%. However, right now I would say it's unlikely that the ANC gets over 50% after these elections, and they will need to form a coalition after these elections if they want to stay in power.
We all know that, you know, coalitions have had a bad rap, that they seem to not lead towards good governance. But the first coalition in South Africa, which was also the first time that a metro fell from the ANC, was actually in the city of Cape Town. That coalition from 2006 didn't seem to have the problems that other coalitions have had. Is it possible to know why that is?
Well, that was such a delicate coalition. There were religious parties, let's say, on the right. You had parties on the left. You had parties of the social justice agenda. You had conservative parties. And I think Helen Zille does deserve some credit there, because there was a very difficult coalition to keep together. There was Buddy Shaban in the African Muslim Party, which threatened to break away and ultimately did. And then the ID came in. And that coalition was held together. But sadly, there have been very few other examples of this in the rest of the country in elections in the future, particularly between 2016 and 2021, which have resulted in a successful coalition. And I can think of very few examples of coalitions that have been successful in the last 5 years.
So, I mean, this is the great risk for Joburg. It's a big metro. In some ways, it's a symbol of the country. It's not a capital, sure, it's not Tshwane. But it is an important place. It's a big place. It's also, maybe because of its urban nature and because its sort of status in the center of Gauteng, one of the places that you look to the future. We saw in Nelson Mandela Bay how bad governance can be if you don't have a stable coalition or stable government of any kind. Is there a risk that that happens in Joburg?
What you say about Johannesburg is 100% true. This is the economic powerhouse of the country. So many people come here with their dreams and aspirations to make a better life for themselves, to contribute to the economy. And what this means is that we've seen tons of pressure on the infrastructure in the city. And I worry that a coalition again will not be able to live up to the dreams and aspirations of so many of those people. which are going to seek a better future here, businesses looking to set up shop here. And that's the risk about a coalition, again, for the next 5 years.
The role of the EFF, so they had significant power, and you've alluded to it, and they had 30 seats in the 2016 elections. Is it possible to predict how they will do? Because it seems to me that they still are likely to emerge as the kingmakers. I mean, maybe there's some polling somewhere that says they even overtake the DA. That probably seems unlikely. But they're certainly likely to have significant power.
The EFF did remarkably well in their first elections. I think they got about over 11% of the vote. They got 30 out of 270 seats. As you say, they have been a significant player in the city over the last 5 years. I do not think they'll overtake the DA. I mean, things will have to go horribly pear-shaped for the DA. It will mean that the Action SA is going to overperform. I think the EFF certainly does grow. I think they're going to take some votes from the ANC and possibly from some other smaller parties in this election. Will they be the kingmaker? That remains to be seen. I think there are 4 significant parties in the race for the city of Johannesburg, and I think they are likely to finish a strong third.
So those 4, the ANC, the DA, EFF, and Herman Mashaba?
Possibly Herman Mashaba, the mercurial, mysterious Mr. Mashaba. I think at the moment he finishes 4th, but will he be a significant player? Let's see.
There's certain things that are happening within these elections that are very interesting, because some of the parties are going into the election already limiting their options. And I realize it's an election campaign, and we can't take them entirely seriously with some of the things that they say. But the DA said today that they will not form any coalition with the EFF. The Freedom Front Plus has said it won't do anything with the ANC. The Action SA has said they won't do anything with the ANC. Now, what's so interesting about this is that no matter how you look at the elections, in Joburg and elsewhere, the ANC is still the party probably most likely to have the highest number of seats in a place like the city of Joburg. So then all of these parties have already really limited their options.
They're being forced into a corner. So I imagine the DA is getting pressure to say that they're going to go down the path of the EFF again. I call it was a coalition of uncommon objectives in 2016. It didn't work very, very well. Then you have a party like the Freedom Front, which we know worked with the ANC, and that didn't end up well for Peter Mulder when he led the Freedom Front. And then the Action SA saying quite clearly, and I think almost trying to hedge themselves, to say, we will be the party to bring, we won't work with the ANC, we'll bring the DA to the senses. We've shown how Mayor Mashaba can work with the EFF. So I think it's very, very important for their voters to know that they're not going to do deals with the support, with their party support, with the people who their party supporters see as the devil. And in some instances, the EFF for the DA, and from an ANC perspective, they see the parties who see the ANC as the devil are parties like the Freedom Front and parties like Action SA. Let us also remember Al-Jamaa, which I think are going to be a significant player after this election. They've said they will work with the ANC. So you have parties on the one hand saying we refuse to work with the ANC, we refuse to work with the EFF, but then you have a party like Al-Jamaa, which won a by-election off the DA in Lenasia, saying we are reliable and we will work with the ANC again and bring some stability to the city.
It's so difficult to try and make any predictions at all. I don't know if the political parties are doing polling. They're not sharing it with, well, they might be sharing it with you. They're not sharing it with me. Feel free to drop any hints if you like. Do you think there could still be room for an upset in Joburg? Could we have something quite strange happening? I mean, could we find that the ANC, actually, despite all of the anger, what the president calls the palpable sense of anger at the ANC, could we find they still get that 50+1?
I think it's unlikely. They might. A few weeks ago, I said they'll fall just short and go to parties like Al-Jamaa, possibly Good, possibly 1 or 2 others to form a coalition. But what I'm hearing from people close to the ANC, I don't know if they're trying to manage expectations, is that the polls are not good for the 2 major parties in the city right now. I haven't seen as much polling as I usually do, but I think both big players in the city of Johannesburg, the ANC and the DA, are not as strong as they were. Even the ANC are not as strong as they were at this stage 5 years ago.
Sure. We talk about, and we've spoken about the sort of bad coalitions, apart from the city of Cape Town, but there is one other which is still operating, which seems to have been fairly effective. And I'm talking just down the road. You know, you go to Eastgate and turn left, and I'm talking about Ekurhuleni. There it was also the kind of coalition that you're talking about. So the ANC with one other small party. In the case of Ekurhuleni, it was the ANC with the African Independence Congress, who had 4 seats. And that, Mzwandile Masina, still seems to be very much in the driving seat. It still seems to have been quite a stable coalition. He's now written a book on the subject.
Yes, so I think one key thing to understand when there's, with Ekurhuleni politics, is the advent of road houses. I think the amount of road houses in Ekurhuleni bring down the political temperament. I'm being slightly facetious, but that is one of the advantages of Ekurhuleni. What is key there is exactly what you say. There are 1 or 2 other smaller parties in Ekurhuleni, but the African Independent Congress and the ANC, yes, there were troubles in that marriage, but that coalition lasted the full 5-year term, not just in Ekurhuleni, but in Rustenburg and for part of the 3 years in Metsimaholo. And I think Mzwandile Masina, who sometimes gets a lot of criticism, really managed that coalition well, and that is the standout coalition for the ANC going into this election. And credit needs to be given to the ANC in that regard for what they've achieved in Ekurhuleni. And I think what the difference between the city of Johannesburg and Ekurhuleni is that the ANC could afford to lose some of those smaller parties in Ekurhuleni. They couldn't afford to lose the smaller parties in the city of Johannesburg because it was much more turbulent political waters.
So, I mean, it gets more and more complicated the deeper down this particular rabbit hole we go. It would seem to me that turnout in Joburg is going to be a major, major factor in this election.
Correct. So and this is a term we're going to use a lot in the next 2 weeks, differential turnout. What was absolutely key? I remember on election day in 2016 going to one of my favorite wards in the city, Ward 58, which is Fordsburg and Mayfair, a traditional, real battleground ward between the DA and the ANC and an independent. I couldn't believe how empty the polling stations were. I also went to some inner city wards, also very empty. And you went to the suburbs, and you just saw the way people were queuing for hours upon hours upon hours. Are we going to see that same differential turnout, where people in the suburbs turn out and most likely going to vote for the DA, for Action SA, possibly the Freedom Front, and are the ANC going to be affected by low turnouts in their traditional strongholds again? That will be something which will concern the ANC. And that is why it's so important in the next few days to get out the vote, to spend as much time as you can in your strongholds and make sure those voters come home for you on election day.
It also shows you why the ANCs and why all the parties are making certain promises. It's about getting their vote out. I mean, the ANC's talking a lot at the moment about electricity in Soweto. Well, there have been problems since 1985.
Correct, and they're making sweeping promises, I think, about cancelling debt, if I remember correctly. This is a major challenge, and this shows you some of the challenges of local government, that if you leave a challenge or a problem for too long, it's just going to spiral and balloon out of control. And I hope that the next administration can sort out the electricity crisis in Soweto, but I'm somewhat skeptical. These are some of the many major infrastructure challenges in this large city.
Wayne Sussman, thanks very much indeed. Good to see you. Nice to have guests in the studio. Wayne Sussman's an independent elections analyst. Well,